2017 was a crazy year for Yu-Gi-Oh! It all started with Raging Tempest and Zodiacs, and then we moved on to like the Dinosaur Structure deck, which brought great cards like Soul Eating Oviraptor and Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. Later on in Maximum Crisis, we got boss monsters like Masterpiece or True King of All Calamities, as well as a really good generic hand trap you guys might have heard about called Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Then, once we had the WCQ season, we got Link Summoning, which obviously was a huge deal. We had Firewall Dragon in the very first Link Summoning set, Code of the Duelist, and with the final core set of the year, Circuit Break, we got really strong cards like Destrudo and Borreload Dragon. We also got the meta-breaking Spiral Double Helix. In other words, 2017 had a bunch of really powerful monster cards, a ton of generically good stuff, a ton of stuff that you want to use in certain archetypes, and overall it was a wild year to be playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, why does this matter? Well, it matters because in today's video, we're not talking about any of those good cards. We're not even talking about the good cards that I didn't mention, because even though the cards I just told you about were certainly some of the better monsters released in 2017, there were so many others that did see success that I don't even have time to mention. That's how crazy that year was for Yu-Gi-Oh! But we're talking about a different card. We're talking about Sea Monster of Theseus, which Konami called, and I quote here, one of the strongest monsters we'll release all year, way back on January 3rd, 2017. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Sea Monster of Theseus is that if Konami just released it as a regular world premiere card and said nothing about it and didn't hype it up, people probably wouldn't even remember it. But because Konami specifically hyped up this card and a lot of people were talking about it, it meant it had to be really insanely powerful to meet all of those expectations. And that simply didn't happen. So this is very different from like a bad card that we all know as pack filler being released and then no one plays it, because Sea Monster of Theseus was specifically hyped up by Konami. This all begins with two articles that Konami published way back in January of 2017. Like I said, the very first one was on the 3rd, so right as the new year started, and it said this. It said, 2017 is a huge blank slate just waiting for all of us to make our mark on it, and thinking about that gave me the perfect idea for a belated holiday gift for you all. The effect text of one of the strongest monsters will release all year, and then hilariously Konami just doesn't write anything for several lines. I was around when this article first went up, and it definitely did get the community talking. People generally thought it would either be a big normal monster like a level 4 monster with 3000 attack points, or a fusion monster that you can summon with instant fusion. Other than that, there aren't really cases where a monster with no text would actually be good. There were also a few discussions about it maybe being a normal pendulum monster, but I think most people thought it would be an instant fusion target. And it turns out that's right. It was an instant fusion target, and it really did have many of the stats that you would want on a good instant fusion monster. This card was revealed on January 24th, just a couple weeks after that initial article. In that second article, Konami did spend some time talking about how many bad fusion monsters, a lot of them even with no effects, have seen play in Yu-Gi-Oh's history just because of what they are, not what they do. And I've talked about this in past videos. It happens all the time. Sometimes just having the right set of stats is more important than having a good effect. So even though this article did get made fun of by a lot of the community, I think Konami was on the right track. This is a really good instant fusion target. It's a level 5 tuner monster, which does open up a lot of combos, as Konami kind of talked about in their article. Many of their combos were not very realistic, but they did give players a good place to start. A level 5 tuner that you can special summon for free with instant fusion does sound pretty appealing. And also it's a zombie water monster, which does give it some unique synergy with other existing archetypes. This being a zombie is probably one of the coolest parts, right, because instant fusion does actually fusion summon the monster, which means you could abuse this card quite a lot with cards like Mizuki to revive it over and over again. So what was the problem? It's a good card, right? I mean, it has all the right stats that you would want on a monster that you could summon off of instant fusion, and people have used way worse cards with instant fusion in the past with a lot of success. The problem was timing. Sea Monster of Theseus was released in Raging Tempest with all of those crazy powerful Zodiacs that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and that's not good for this card because Zodiacs are all about making rank 4 monsters, and oftentimes the pure Zodiac deck would pretty much only play Zodiacs in the extra deck besides a couple random choices like a couple Daigusto Emerald or maybe one Gagaga Samurai. The other timing issue with this card is that it was released when the actual best instant fusion target was still legal in the TCG format. When Sea Monster of Theseus was introduced into the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, Elder Entity Norden was still legal, which has always been the best instant fusion target in all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history. So this thing was released in a set with very powerful level 4 monsters and rank 4 monsters, and also released at a time where there was a better instant fusion target. And maybe if those two things happened and Konami never made those articles, people wouldn't have said anything. Maybe people would have just thought, oh, that's a cool tech card that I guess we can use with instant fusion at some point. But because of how much the card had been hyped up, if it didn't immediately change the format or at least make an impact on the meta, it would be a huge flop. What's funny here is that the card actually did see some play. Between its release and December of 2018, this card was featured in a little over 20 topping decks. That is a fairly decent number. It's nothing too crazy, and honestly in many of these decks, we're not really sure if people were actually summoning this thing consistently, but at least it was an option, and that is always cool. If you look at the decks that this card was featured in, you probably wouldn't find too many surprises. Pretty much any deck that wanted to synchro summon was playing this card. So you saw it in decks like Dark Synchro and the 60 card decks that featured a lot of random combo starter cards, and plenty of other decks that really did want to synchro summon. That really is the best use for this card, just using it as a level 5 tuner monster that you can summon for free when you don't want to summon Norden. Plenty of cards in this game have never topped an event, and plenty of others have only topped like 1 or 2 events, so I guess by comparison, Sea Monster is doing pretty well. The problem was, as I keep coming back to, is that it was hyped up way too much, which meant that unless the card was always in every single deck, people were never going to feel that it lived up to the hype. The fallout here, by the way, is hilarious. Ever since this card was first revealed, people have now always been skeptical whenever Konami talks about world premiere cards. One of the funnier examples in hindsight of people being skeptical of Konami writing about world premiere cards was the 2019 Mega Tin. So in this tin, Konami gave us a little teaser for 3 new world premiere cards. They said they are designed to be usable in any deck and help you stage a comeback against some of the fastest strategies that might come from your opponent. I cannot even count the number of comments that I saw about that reveal of the 2019 Mega Tin promos, where so many people said these are going to be the next Sea Monster of Theseus. Now in hindsight, like I said, we know all 3 of these cards were very, very good. Even the weakest one, Dimension Shifter, still saw tons of play. This is very similar to how people always think the next world premiere archetype is going to be just like Burning Abyss or Cosmo or Spirals, at least in terms of power level. What I'm trying to say here is that when Konami or the player base builds a card up to being one of the best cards released in like that year or that set or whatever, when that happens and people get really, really excited for it, the card is almost always doomed to fail. Yes, sometimes it can meet those expectations or maybe even exceed them, but in many cases, if every single player thinks the card is going to be broken, if the card is anything but broken, then a lot of people are going to be disappointed. Hype can be very dangerous in all sorts of ways, and in the case of Sea Monster of Theseus, the card itself actually is very good on paper. The card itself has seen play, but it will never reach the heights of that original article. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.